end of turn. So this is kind of what your inputs to the fine-tuning need to look like. So you can create a custom function that does exactly this for you. Again, I did not spend any time generating this. I just asked ChatGPT to kind of create this for me. So, it's just taking, if a data point is an input, you do start a turn user, you put the instructions, you put the inputs, and then you say end a turn, and then you say start a turn model, then you concatenate the output, and so on and so forth. And essentially what you end up with is this. So we've added essentially a prompt column to the data set where it looks like start a turn user. Below is an instruction that describes a task, write a response that appropriately completes the request. And this is what we saw earlier, create a function to calculate the sum of a sequence of integers. Here are the inputs, end of turn, and then start a turn model. Here's the Python code, end of turn. Questions about this? And here's a better printout of that. This is what it looks like at the end of all of that pre-processing.
Yeah, so Umang, so it seems like you have basically you gave us two examples of loading a data set. One was a pre-canned one with the code instructions, the Python code instructions or C code. And then the other one is you created a data set effectively.
Right, the
and
translation, yes.
so they're unrelated, but I just wanted to make sure I understood that they're unrelated, but you're just showing us two different ways we could create a data set.
Correct.
And then in the formatting side, you're actually going back to the first data set to say, how do we format that properly? The coding data set, how do we format that properly so that we can use it for future, for training or for what we're going to use it next?
Right, exactly. Yeah. And even for this translation task, this would be required. You would need to format this translated data set similarly, where you would have start a turn, the English text, but again, you would probably have a prompt before the English text saying, here is an English text. I want to translate this to medieval French following the Anglo spoken in England in the 1400s. Here's the English text, and then end of turn model. Here's the French text. So yeah, you would still need to do that pre-processing here.
So the medieval French text would be the model response, basically.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yeah. So right after here, start a turn model, this is where the medieval French text would go.
Okay.
Other questions?
So Among, I put this in the chat, but maybe I'll just ask it. Well, can you just read the question that's in the chat? It's probably easier than me repeating it.
Okay, sure, yeah. Related to the consciousness training example mentioned earlier, is it possible to do fine tuning similar to what you have here, but in a self-supervised masking paradigm rather than prompt response pairs? Totally. You could totally do that. I haven't tried it or necessarily seen anybody do it, because whenever you Google fine-tuning large language model, everybody's just trying to fine-tune it to do a specific task. But yes, you could very much mask out parts of this medieval French text and then kind of have it learn on that.
Are there packages to do it directly, or are we doing this manually? Part of our question was how big a corpus we need. And I know you sort of said there's no way to know, but I was just wondering for that different kind of approach, if there's any way to think about it.
Yeah, you could use mass language modeling or causal language modeling for sort of post pre-training fine-tuning. But the only issue with that would be it may not know when, again, like you're fine-tuning it to respond in a certain way, essentially. So you're still going to want to maybe create a prompt response pair just so that it does respond the way that you want it to when you ask it a question later. It might improve its sort of domain knowledge with mass language modeling, but Jesse, maybe you can speak to that a little bit more, because I haven't actually seen anybody do mass language modeling for like.
Let me say one more thing about what we're trying to do that may help or just make it harder. Because when you say no one's done it before, it makes me worried that probably there's a reason for that. But what we're trying to do is it's a stance, right? So it's not exactly different knowledge or information, but a different relationship to it. And so for a bunch of reasons, doing what you're saying to have it respond in a particular way for particular tasks is both conceptually and practically problematic. Like we can't do that and we wouldn't want to do that. But I don't know if this notion of stance taking is useful or if maybe we're just like really far in left field now.
Yeah, you might need to get this is something you might need to dig into during office hours. I think that you're Alyssa, I think you're probably right in that the building blocks are there, the concepts are there. So this is I think this is I'm backing away from my earlier stance in the text now that I'm thinking about this more, but sort of figuring out what would be the task that you'd be training it on is an important one. But I would say let's talk during office hours or during another time more in depth. But this really gets to the heart of part of what training these models entails, is figuring out exactly what task you want to give to them, with the idea that then they would learn, a particular new skill or representation. So with mass language modeling, and often you're trying to teach concepts, right? And that's something which has been done with parameter efficient fine tuning, with more or less success depending on the setting. There was a paper yesterday about trying to teach models how to program that had not previously been trained to program using parameter efficient fine tuning methods, and it didn't work all that well, but probably because there weren't enough building blocks there. So it's a really good question, and a lot of this is you don't know until you try. One other thing that I'll mention is that LoRa, in addition to being sensitive to R, also has another issue, and this has to do with it's a deeper theoretical issue. There are alternative approaches. Dora is one that can handle the challenge of doing parameter efficient fine tuning, especially in the presence of a very complex and subtle task. So fast moving field. I wish there were an easy answer, but often it's an empirical question. Try it.
Thanks.
There is also another question. Is there a good guide to prompts for getting scripts like these from ChatGPT? I've only had partial success to get these to work without having to rewrite half the code. I will say if you were using GPT 3.5, this is totally to be expected. But with GPT-4, I've seen this a lot less. With 4.0, even less so. Generally, if I'm trying to get it to create code that outputs data of a certain kind, I usually like to give it kind of a snippet of the data or a good description of the data of both the inputs and the outputs, so that it does know kind of where it's starting and where it needs to go. But that being said, there are a lot of good sort of approaches to prompt engineering, which we might not go into in much detail, but there are some other resources that we list somewhere on this. Where did it go? I was just looking at that earlier today. Yeah, prompt engineering paper. This prompt pattern catalog to enhance prompt engineering with ChatGPT. Jesse worked on this paper along with a couple of really great researchers at Vanderbilt, but this provides some really great approaches and prompt patterns to follow when trying to get responses in a certain way.
And I'll also mention, don't forget those, use that longer context. Everything is dependent on that context. So if you have if you have template code or sample code of this being done well, you can include that as well. You can say, here's an example that solves a different problem, but I want a code like this. You can also put the documentation for libraries in there if you want to. All of that can be used by the model in context to do a better job of generating code.
That link here, I'll put that in the chat as well, but you can also find this in our GitHub repository. Other questions? All right, and if you have other questions, just put it in the chat, but since we have about 10 minutes left, I'm gonna move forward. So yeah, so now we have a data set that works well for Gemma specifically. So if you do want to fine tune something in Llama, Mistral, Falcon, you're going to want to take a look at their model pages and figure out how they format their data. And all of that is usually available on Hugging Face. So coming back to the conversation we were having on Monday about confidential data. So training with confidential data is, again, provides its own set of issues. You obviously can't just use random data to train or fine-tune a model and then expect it to respond correctly, because it might not know the specifics of what you're asking for. But generally, what we've seen is most commercial options for fine-tuning, such as OpenAI's fine-tuning API, are simply just not viable for this. Fine-tuning with open source models is the easiest and most straightforward solution you'd be able to use, because you'd be able to just fine-tune on your own servers without having to send out your data over an API. With the caveat being that if you are fine-tuning something like a Gemma or a Llama or even a Mixtral, you're going to want to ensure that you're following the sort of guidelines and policies that Facebook and Google lay out for what you can and cannot do with these models. Somewhere in the documentation, it did say at some point that these models may not be used for multilingual purposes. That might have changed by now, but you definitely want to take a look at their policies just so you're not doing something you're not supposed to. But as of May 16, there is a brand new development called differentially private synthetic training data. This was a paper published by Google, which you can go take a look at here. But this brand new technique presented by Google Research basically provides a method for you to train on synthetic data that retains the key characteristics of the original data, but is actually entirely artificial and provides strong privacy protection. And the main sort of thing that they've done here is they do fine-tuning on they do fine-tuning on a publicly on an LLM trained on public data using differentially private stochastic gradient descent. This is just a gradient descent algorithm. But what makes it differentially private is that they add some amount of noise to the gradients before they're used to update the model parameters. And this noise is calibrated to the sort of sensitivity of the function being optimized and the desired level of privacy. They didn't go into too much details about that in just this paper, but they referred to a bunch of other papers for differentially private stochastic gradient descent. But essentially what this results is in a model that maintains sort of utility and function, but protects individual data points. The brand new sort of announcement, which hopefully we'll see a lot more happen around. And yeah, so obviously by using this algorithm, you could theoretically train models on data that is sort of confidential to your organization, but also not have a model that just gives out sort of private information if you ask for it. So for example, if you were working with something like, patient health information or something in the financial sector, you obviously wouldn't want to train on just the data as is, because now you could just literally ask the model, what is Umang's state of health, or what is his social security number, because that data happened to be there. And it will tell you that if you didn't sort of mask that information. But using DPSGD, you can apparently get around that issue. So outside of fine-tuning, though, you might also want to inference with large language models like ChatGPT using private data. However, given the risk of sort of data leakage, you might want to use some sort of synthetic data. And large language models can be used to generate the synthetic data. So an example in practice was another project that we did this past semester called Project GRIP, which was gun-related injury prevention. So what this contained was about, I think, 50 to 70 NDA-protected interview transcripts about individuals and their attitudes towards guns and gun control. And what they had done was essentially create this 500 category coding manual that was used to identify themes across interview transcripts. But the issue with this is a very tedious process and very difficult process, because every time a researcher needs to read through an entire interview transcript, these interviews can sometimes contain pretty graphic information because people talk about their experience with guns. And just generally, very, very tedious process because you're trying to, keep track of 500 codes. But a chat model can be a great tool for this kind of task, but we're unable to provide ChatGPT with this interview transcript yet because we don't have access to GPT-4 through sort of that level 3 access. So to get a head start while we wait for that kind of access, we created synthetic transcripts using OpenAI's custom GPTs. So what essentially we did was we looked through the actual interview transcripts and kind of came up with these sets of personas, detailed descriptions of interviewees' experiences, opinions, attitudes, a little bit of general demographic information like age, gender, race. And then we created personas that, using this information to come up with sort of identities that represented a sample of interviewees. Also, obviously, we made sure that none of these identities closely matched or resembled that of an actual interviewee that was present in the interview set. So then we sort of fed these personas to the custom GPTs along with instructions on exactly what we were trying to achieve. And then we gave it the interview sort of questions and told it to interview itself. Rather than going one by one, and which would also be slower, ask it questions, we simply just gave it the interview questions in a document. It interviewed itself, and what it generated was interview transcript that proved to be a pretty good proxy for the types of responses actually given by interviews. And then what we did was while we waited, we just developed prompts that were able to code each transcript against that 500-page coding manual. So we came up with about 40 to 50 different prompts for each kind of chunk of the coding manual. And then essentially we now have about 40 prompts ready to go. So once we get level 3 access, we can simply upload the interview transcript, the actual private confidential interview transcript, and then simply give it the prompt and it'll do the coding for us. Questions about that or anything else? I think we are at the end of our time. I do have some other resources here if you are interested in other modalities. Hugging Face has great resources on training image models for things like object detection and audio models for classification, and then a couple of extra resources. But thanks. Other questions?
All right, then I will go ahead and remind you all that on Friday, we're going to be pulling all this together. I will not be here on Friday, but the rest of the team is going to be pulling all this together. So you'll actually get hands-on experience with data and actually training a model using these parameter efficient fine-tuning methods. So for many of the things that you want to be able to accomplish with these models, parameter efficient fine-tuning is going to be the way to go. So you'll be actually getting hands-on experience doing that on Friday. Anyone else from the team? Anything else we want to leave folks with? Perhaps with a reminder about tomorrow's AWS session, Sharo?
Oh, yes, that's such a good point. Oh, am I frozen? Nope, I'm okay. So just a reminder, if you haven't signed up yet, we're having the AWS AI Bedrock Training Day led by an AWS AI and machine learning expert who is from AWS. And so we'll be talking about a lot of the things that we talked about last week, except for how to implement those things specifically on AWS. So how to use like their knowledge base, but how we can also do that with open source platforms. Very cool. They will also be talking about multimodal models. So if you think about having like an image with text, and how you can search those things together, they'll be presenting that and how you can build knowledge bases about that. And they'll also be talking a little bit more about their new agent platform as well as just the regular text generation and RAG sorts of things. So I'm super excited. If you haven't signed up, go ahead and sign up. If you're in Nashville, we hope to see you in person. So sign up for the in-person. And I'm really excited. You should be able to find that link on our website, even though I can track it down now as well. But we hope to see you there.
Taro, is that on the Data Institute, you're saying, website?
Yes, and let me see if I can dig it up like right now. All right, here it is. And then the direct link to sign up, I'll put that one second. And there will be breakfast and some lunch provided. There'll be people there that have your shared interest, and the actual AWS person will be there. So if you have direct questions about your particular application or what you very specifically want to do, then they're right there to be able to answer that question. They also have knowledge of the full scope of what an application looks like. So from the authentication at the beginning to the creation of the UI at the end, they have this full scope understanding. And I have already been asking them questions to death, so they should be pretty prepared for your questions as well. So we hope to see you there. I'm so pumped.
And stick around if you have questions for our office hours. Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Lily.
Hi,
Hi there.
my name is Sim. I'm very behind to catch up all these videos, but then I just want to come up with the idea. I'm working with my preceptor. We are talking about, I have a big set of data. I have a data. Somebody bought that for me, so that's awesome. So we are looking for we are, it's only from Arizona. It's quite old, but I can have something to play with. So I am thinking about, I'm not saying that I need to go hardcore of creating an application and things like that, but I want to kind of see a predictive value to say, hey, using all these social determinants of health. So by using what I learned in this summer AI, what is the best way I need to put my brain together? Because right now my brain is stuck at the user interface. I'm not in the developmental mode. So I'm having hard time to link together. It's like, wait, what should I switch my mindset to? Like, what is the best? Should I just schedule like a 1 hour with all of you guys to like,
Or actually now is the perfect time for this. And so and the problem, just so you know, that you expressed is not uncommon at all, because we're so used to thinking about how we're going to interact with our solution versus what the solution needs to do. And especially now, the entire purpose behind building, interactive interfaces was, to put data into a form that could be used by the program, right? So that interface was for the computer program. It was not really for the human, not really. And now we're in the place where we can communicate as we will with these. Sometimes we just have a large language model, and the only thing that it does is take our conversation and then sort of change it around and then make the calls, right? So we don't need to think about interface. So the question is, what do you want to know from the data, and what answers do you want to be able to, what questions do you want to be able to answer from the data? And that really is the starting point.
that's a reason that I need to double check with my preceptor, because the end goal is, if I have a patient comes in to say, oh, this is my zip code, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, then I can use that model and tell me, oh, a lot of the time, based on what we have in the reference data, all these patients have living in poverty, they don't have the education, they have certain health. So how can we help the physician? Is like, oh, if you tell me your zip code is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, I can tell you a list of the issue, and then where I can send you the help.
Right.
So the simplest things that I need to get out of this data set this way.
No, that's perfect. Now the question is, how does a physician take in information? Right? They're not the structured information, probabilities. It is not going to be, it's probably may very well want to have that as plain language, which is calibrated to be correct. You can say, this patient, is from an area, low socioeconomic status, reading level, education level might be this, might be this. Note this may be, this isn't a certainty, but these are the things to be thinking of. Or you even might go a step further. If you're doing decision support, then it could be, give guidance. You can say, ensure, if you get a zip code and the zip code is, ensure that the patient understands, ensure that the patient has a good command of English, right? Because you have a high probability of non-English speakers in a particular zip code, could be. So think about what you want to give to the physician, because now it could be presented in any way that you want. Physicians, as you probably know, tend to think in terms of cases, right? And what patients are like this. So one way to communicate might be, patients from this area tend to be like the following.
Does that mean I have to go back and check? Because I have this data, they're all in the CSV Excel data file. I need to go back and check what are the age demographic in order for me to create this large language model to like ask the right question.
Or you might have a tool that you call, right? So it could be, you might actually have a tool which does a lookup on this and then gives that as information. So imagine you yourself, if you yourself said, okay, you know the zip code, and you pull that relevant information in, and you can imagine sort of crafting a prompt, right, for the LLM saying, summarizing the information that you have, please provide a summarization or a case, example case, or however you want to do this. So what you can do is then you can build a tool which the LLM could call, or and we can help you think through something more specific. Or you could call an LLM at the very end. So, right, so the first interface could be, hey, you just make a call to this tool, and what the tool does is it does a lookup, and then it calls a prompt for the large language models, and then returns this summary to you.
So can you help me phrase my workflow right now? So right now I have this CSV file. Which platform I should upload it so I can start playing with it?
If you would, and you can do this right now, just on a piece of paper right in front of you, sketch out what happens. Patient comes in, information is input to someplace, doctor gets a summary. So think about that, and then that will drive where things need to be. And while you're doing that, we'll take other questions.
That's good. Thank you.
Charo, I had a quick question for you.
I may have a quick answer.
Okay. Miranda, excuse me, mentioned a project you'd worked on last year where you were assisting an architect identify architectural regulations within a region for a program, like something about windows. I don't know if you remember this. Sorry.
This might have been a deep dive.
Okay. So what I'm trying to do similarly is categorize information within a specific region for like environmental documents that are delivered or posted online for a certain region. And I want to identify, okay, what environmental impacts are disclosed within that region. If other people have questions, I'm happy to do this in a chat room. I didn't know if you had any particular insights on I don't know if it's an action that I need to incorporate into the RAG, and all this is very new to me. So
I think this was a deep dive, but I don't think I was at that deep dive. But from what you described, for me, it sounds like, if you're trying to group regulations and only kind of RAG on like that certain set of regional regulations, that is something that can for sure be realized through RAG, where you can take, so the most straightforward approach would be to have like a very specific vector store for that particular region. Or if you want to write something a little bit more complex, you could have it in your overall vector store and then just filter out. So basically how it will work is whenever you go to do RAG, either one way is you can do it specifically on this particular data set. I would also recommend that while you're doing RAG, and creating your vector store. So that component of RAG, you'll add specific metadata associated with the region. So like essentially for every chunk that you have, you would have like some metadata that says region, blah, 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 or whatever else that you can possibly add. Also, LLMs can be really good, as we saw, about creating structured information from like non-structured information. And so you can also have, if you want to augment your vector store with that metadata, you can extract that structured data from your actual data. So it'll be a component of your vector store, meaning that you can filter any information in that vector store first before using it for RAG. So I think a lot of what it sounds like is that you will be focusing on the creation of the vector store itself, making sure to add filterable components where you can extract the specific vectors from the vector store that you want the model to be using for RAG. And so also, with agent-based approach, it gets to be even more, exciting, because you can have an agent that is just really good at doing this for this particular region, or you can just consider this particular retrieval vector store to be, a tool. And so like you have your little description, which is for any questions that have to do with this particular region, like you go to this vector store, you use this very specific tool. And then that can also help to limit like your answers about that particular region to that vector store that has that information.
Okay. And if I didn't want to use, is RAG the best model to retrieve information from an online repository?
Oh, that's interesting.
Remember
So- go ahead.
I was just going to say, remember, all that RAG is doing is trying to get the right information into
Right.
context, right? So if it's not too big, if you already know the region and you're like, I just want all of it in there, you could do that, especially with the longer context model. It could be, this is Seaside. I want everything from Seaside, and I'm just going to jam it all in. Or this is Seaside, and this has to do with these particular zoning. If the data is already organized like that, you could just do like a SQL. But the main thing is you get the appropriate thing, you put it into context.
Okay. Beautiful. Thank you.
No problem.
Other questions?
Yeah, Jesse and Charu, I had a question that I struggle with understanding. When I think of fine tuning, I think of your fine tuning simplistically. The way I think of it is you're fine tuning on like, oh, I want to make BERT into SciBERT or BioBERT or something it's got a special. I know this is using the word out of context, but it's got a certain knowledge or sense specialty. But then I hear of like instruction fine tuning, which
and let me
is
go and
more
put in
teaching it. Yeah,
I'd put in there that I don't know if that would be fine tuning, right? Fine tuning, the idea behind that is you're not having to go too far, right? But so if you're trying to make like a BioBERT, that particular example that you gave, that may be beyond fine tuning. That could be a whole training from scratch, which we've done in collaboration with VUMC. Just know that fine tuning is okay. You're hoping that the base knowledge is going to remain there. You may not be changing a whole lot. Instruction fine tuning, even though it's giving a lot new capability, is still sort of leaving most of what's there, right? So fine tuning, the idea is that most of what has been learned remains.
Okay, so in instruction fine tuning, there's these instruction sets. What is it like? It's basically teaching them. I'm getting confused as to what it's actually.
Yeah.
What's the data set in that respect look like?
Could you please do the following for me? And if you would, please blurb 4 and 5. Oh, you don't know what blurb is. Okay.
No.
So if I blurb 9 and 10, that'll be 90. If I blurb 30 and 5, that'll be 150. If I blurb, so it's actually quite literally training on a new task and a new way of putting together the existing information. You realize all I did was come up with a stupid name for multiplication, right? And it could be something that's pulling more things together. Instruction fine-tuning is training on the very idea of knowing that you're being asked to do something. So without instruction fine-tuning, the models just, all they're doing is producing the next probable token. They don't, you know, I use the example, you know, please tell me some books by Stephen King. An untrained instruction fine-tuning model would respond, because I'm interested in books, you know, horror books, right? But an instruction fine-tune would recognize that you've come to the end of an instruction and sort of recognizes this whole thing together hangs as an instruction, which is a request to do something. So you can think of it, and the way you train it is you give it a whole bunch of instructions and then the answers, right? So please tell me, give me some books by Stephen King. The Stand, you know, The Tower, so versus what it wanted to do, which was continue the question. And so it begins to learn, oh, when I see this kind of semantic structure, and remember, it's a large language model, so it understands, oh, when I have a request, because I recognize this as a request, I don't keep writing the request, I answer the request.
It figures that out. It's being taught that semantic structure. That
it is being taught the semantic structure. That kind of training almost always is full training, right? When it's instruction fine-tuning, when it's meant to be as far generalizable, and you're training at a whole new class of things, that tends to be full model training. If it's a smaller thing where you actually very much more explicit, I want you to summarize this, it has lots to learn, right? And so it can do complex things, but think of that as being sort of a more targeted kind of a task versus understand instructions, you know, instructions and tasks.
Okay.
And also someone just recently asked about, like, they had data that they wanted to like upload and start using. Maybe Umang, I know you talked about like anything LLM and LM Studio. Could you just like briefly just talk about those, like, or reference them again?
Yeah, so anything LLM and LM Studio are two tools, applications that are available for you to download for free that will allow you to sort of run a model locally and then also create sort of that RAG-like infrastructure where you upload a document and ask questions off of that without doing any programming. So I would definitely look into those two applications. You actually might not even need need LM Studio. Anything LLM also has built-in integrations with sort of OpenAI's API and all that kind of good stuff. So that would definitely easy to use tool.
I have a question about now, if I have a database, like SQL database, I can't just, as I understand from all these meetings, I can't just like connect to it and just ask questions and it's gonna give me the answer. I have to like fine tune these my the expected output, right?
Not necessarily. If your model knows how to A, use an API, B, know how to write SQL code, it will be able to reach out to your SQL database over the API, write SQL code that answers the request, grab the data and pull it for you into context. So yeah, if you have there's a SQL coder on Olama. There's also a SQL RAG infrastructure tool that LangChain provides. But generally, at least ChatGPT does know how to program in SQL. It also knows how to use APIs. So if you have your data set hosted somewhere, you can totally use that to kind of use along with your chat model.
And if you want to sort of experiment, you know, before you sort of try to build all that, you can also as Umang was mentioning before, actually share with, especially GPT-4 or the other larger models, what your data schema is and examples of data. And then you can say, okay, here's this, and here's where I'm going to be running this. Write me SQL code to answer the following question. And then you yourself can actually copy, paste, try it out, see how well it works. Is there part of it that doesn't understand? Maybe you need to improve your data dictionary. Maybe you need to like describe more of what's happening with the data. And once you get that right, then you know that the model is capable of writing correct, and good SQL code to answer your questions. And then you can build all the other stuff.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, can we jump in? I didn't want to take over, but we
Yeah.
do want to follow up with that question we started talking about during the session. Because we've been wrestling with, I think, 3 different ways to deal with this training, whether it's fine tuning or full training. And I think I'll lay them out and then maybe Fanji wants to say a bit more. One was the notion of the fine tuning, which is what I think Shalini had done based on GPT-2 last year. And obviously we're not using GPT-2 anymore, but starting with the model that's trained generally and then trying to train it more specifically, I think using the self-supervised masking on the corpus we're pulling together. A second option is the one that you mentioned, Jesse, just based on the stuff that's been coming out like a day ago from Anthropic around the notion of features, though maybe that would be very, very soon to move on that. And then the third one that Fanji had been thinking about, also coming from Anthropic, this sort of notion of constitutional AI. I'm familiar with that. And so I think we're trying to figure out the trade-offs between which one to pursue, or is trying to look at each of them differently, something that's actually interesting and publishable, or I think that's where we're at. And is there more you wanted to put out there to frame the question for them? I guess not.
Yeah, so I would say all of them are very, very interesting. I think that that together they can make a great paper, and you could have both, sort of a paper on almost 2 papers, one being methodological. So if you want to do these things, then here are the possibilities. You're right, this is awfully close to alignment, right? And so the same tools that you would use for alignment, you could use for this. But it's an interesting thing. If you could get it to work with parameter efficient fine tuning, then one of the really nice things that happens is now you have this this adapter that you can use or not use with a model, right? And so you want to put it in, great, plug it in. It doesn't require that much more calculation to do that. And you have also identified, I think that there's a way to do this. But I have to think through the rest of it, Alyssa, but you can examine. That's a much lower dimensional space. So if you use the same type of an approach that Anthropic used yesterday, but in this much lower dimensional, we call them the A and B matrices for the, the sort of the parallelograms that I showed before, the lower dimensionality for the delta W. You could examine what was pulled out in order to actually instantiate this new type of interaction with the model, right? So that's of interest as well. The tricky thing is how what kind of task are you going to be training on?
Well, so the task is supposed to be a tool to support university students, particularly from minoritized backgrounds, in broadly stated professional identity development, but obviously that's a really big thing. So it's sort of like thinking about how they can explore meaningful careers and how that can guide them through their studies. And does that make sense? So that's the task, but it's a much bigger task than just answer this question, obviously.
Oh, and I was thinking task would be that you would want to use for training. So that's sort of like the eventual downstream task, which I mean, it's always good with this to try to get as close to that final task as possible to have a really good close proxy.
I guess I'm very concerned about what we would use for that's why we were never, so the original idea was never to do any sort of to do any sort of fine tuning based on pairs, because such pairs don't currently exist. It was much more about representing the ideas of critical consciousness and
Okay.
a sort of sensitivity to power and need to address inequitable power structures. So the notion of doing this for advising hasn't really been done. So that doesn't exist. Two, I think for both practical training, like model reasons, and also like political reasons, creating a data set that could be inspected of exactly what one would say is actually maybe not ideal, if that makes sense.
No, understandable. But you have, so what are the documents? Are these like articles, chapters? Okay.
So that's where we're at right now, which is why we wanted to talk to you, because we're literally yesterday had the meeting to start off the corpus framing selection searching process, and we could still change it.
I see.
So the current idea was to look for long form writing that reflected attention to critical consciousness. And we talked about different ways to operationalize this, which are also a bit tricky and problematic. One version could be things that refer back to someone like Paulo Freire, but the issue is a little bit how to form it's a bit of an amorphous corpus, like trying to get people nailed down as to saying, how would we define what this is, or how would we even search for it? We were actually applying some techniques you might use in like a systematic lit review. And one of the challenges is that a lot of times articles are not sort of complete. They refer to a lot of work that comes before them for them to be meaningful. So that was the initial notion of going for long form writing that was either in books or long articles. I don't know. I don't think neither Fanji or I were very happy with the outcome of the conversation from a model building perspective. It got very deep and theoretical and was not very operational, in my opinion.
Could I add something to the training data that we would like to have? The reason I'm thinking about constitutional AI is because constitutional AI is kind of like explicit in their value stance by compiling principles.
Yes.
And it feels like some of the documents we have could be put into the long context or RAJ, whatever, to use as the principles that guide the models kind of
Great. Yeah.
sample generation, and we could use this new kind of model response that reflect these principles to redo the kind of fine tuning. So that's where I feel like the constitutional AI fits, maybe.
So I like that idea. Often, you know, that idea of using a better informed model is a good one, and that's a very interesting idea. So I'll give you an example of something that we did that may be similar to this, and may give you a way to generate data, the kind of data that you would need to have for parameter efficient fine tuning in particular. So I had a graduate student who was interested in ancient Greek, and in particular technical ancient Greek. So and there just aren't that many examples of that. And so what we did was we took writings on ancient technical Greek, and so this was like descriptions of it, you know, and then there were some examples in there too, but it was sort of an exegesis on the whole, you know, on what it looks like, what it sounds like, what the writing is like, and then we use that extremely long prompt in a long context model to then say, here, now take this text and then restate it using these principles. So we went from English to correct and good, you know, ancient Greek, technical Greek, right? And now we had all the training examples that we want to do. Just keep on rerunning that, generate as much of that as you want to. And you can, you know, you can start with, you know, moving from one type of statement to another, or it could be identification. It could be almost any task which requires an understanding of that. So, and yet you just have to be a little bit creative. Ours was pretty straightforward, right? It was like translate this English into ancient Greek. But you can think of other tasks too. And now you have a way where it takes a long context model and a lot of compute, but then it can generate those extremely valuable training examples if you want to do that. Alyssa, does that sort of get around the issues of handcrafting? Because it's directly driven, and you can do an experiment of like with and without that full context, right? So you could do just write this for me, and you have like a little stub, versus here's this long.
I mean, I think we could, I think we could play with it and try it, right? So similar to what you said before, it would really depend on what it is producing. But I think the notion that what we're doing is articulating principles, and then that is leading to a chain of events, whether it's creating a training data set or something else, is a viable route.
Well, yeah, but and what if you, yeah, and so like the task could be elaborate on the principles that are, you know, in this particular writing, you know. Iman, can you think of like is there direct training that you can think of on the documents themselves that wouldn't necessarily be causal language modeling? Like my mind is going to like give a couple of sentences and then have it produce the next couple of sentences. Like how can you do training on concepts, or do you just do causal language modeling?
Yeah, I mean, that essentially technically is causal language modeling.
Yeah.
First sentence followed by next sentence.
Yeah.
I think that's probably the way that I would go. I mean, essentially the translation task that we were trying to do for medieval French was very similar, right? You're giving it English text and then have it generate French, but we were also looking into here's half the French text, complete the rest. And that's actually one of the things that they wanted to do with these models. And I feel like that could work. Like I think it should develop some sort of understanding of, all right, if you're talking about the definition of, you know, a specific topic, and then it comes up with something that makes most sense grammatically, but then you correct it to actually teach it the real definition. I think it should over time develop some sort of understanding of the concept itself. So, I mean, yeah, causal language modeling should work theoretically. But yeah, I would probably do like smaller chunks, start off maybe simpler, like just outlining basic concepts. Like you could use a large language model to generate this kind of data set, would just be, you know, give it a lot of text and ask it to break it up into concepts that would be worth teaching to someone. Like you could even approach it from okay, I'm trying to teach a class on this topic, and here is a lot of text on this topic, and how would I, you know, create questions? Because one of the examples that I gave for causal language modeling was question and answer. So you could, you know, use a long
Question, what is the blah, blah, blah concept? Answer.
Oh, yeah.
You could take a long context model, give it that like book, chapter, or whatever,
and then ask it to generate questions.
And then you use the question answer pairs.
Oh, I really like that.
But that is not the task it will be doing later. Does that?
No, that's fine.
Yeah, because you're gonna it will also inherently develop a expertise on answering questions like that, but it is also at the same time learning the semantic concepts behind it, and all, you know, all of that is still ending up in sort of the hidden layers and everything. So
the more obvious is when you're doing the full training of the entire model and you're doing it on that task, it learns that representation. A little bit more subtle, but if that task is close enough, then even with parameter efficient fine tuning, it is tying together those concepts, and that's useful, right? And so, you know, remember, because remember that delta W and that W, the pre-trained that are unchanged, are parallel. One informs the other. So this could be, you know, this could help guide the model, even doing that question answer pair. So yeah, that's what these weights are really most tuned for, but they're also a really useful representation of pulling together all the concepts. And if that is useful in answering, then it will get used.
Do you think it is interesting? Because I, for whatever reason, I feel like Shalini's very committed to replicating her approach, which involved using the master approach. Do you think it's useful to
Sure.
contrast them, and then Fanji might work on the one we just described, and we can sort of see? Because
Yeah.
I think this one will be more targeted, but it obviously will be a smaller fine tuning corpus we would be working.
Yeah.
on.
I think it's an interesting question in and of itself. You know, what is supported by parameter efficient fine tuning? That's one. And then even beyond that is, okay, if it is supported by the parameter efficient fine tuning, and if you're getting what you want out of it versus training the entire thing, now you've like captured those dimensions in those A/B matrices, which you can then analyze.
Well, and we can do it as a check to see
Yeah.
with some experts, do we feel like all the elements of whatever critical consciousness ought to
Right.
be? Does this feel
Does it capture everything? And then again, that's like, okay, guess what? Those particular dimensions and aspects of the larger feed-forward networks that were most important for this are captured in these much smaller A/B matrices. So now you can analyze those A/B matrices and how they work with and combine the information to actually talk about the conceptual representation within the model of those ideas.
the original model?
The original one.
Which
Separate question, not
right,
that
no,
we're
but
going out.
talking about things like, I mean, it's not bias exactly, but sort of a lack of awareness of the
Yeah.
model to, for example, power structures could be
Right.
interesting.
Absolutely. And you say, and these are not new ideas. You're not forcing something on the model. They exist. It's just that they're not tied together.
Interesting. All right, I think we have much to go play with, and potentially we will be back later next week with
Okay.
hopefully some things to chat about then.
Right. Wonderful. Sim, did you have a chance to sort of sketch out? Would you like to talk a little bit more about yours? Oh, bye. Oh, and just checking with other people too. So, raise your hand if you have questions. But Sim. Oh, yeah. Okay. So patient comes in, patient registered at the front desk. Okay. Got it. Okay. So you would like to, when the patient registers at the front desk, between then, and maybe when you get the patient's data, prepare something for the physician. You're still muted, just so you know.
So this is the time that usually at the vital sign taken and health Q&A, that is when we ask all the main questions. It's like, hey, do you have like a suicide ideation? We ask those questions. Hey, your immunization, and all the questions are usually answered over here. I actually was just looking at my data set. They actually have their credit card information, like what type of credit card they use. So I need to go back and ask them, it's like, hey, if I want to play with this data set, what are the things that I need to be aware of? So
Please, dear God, yes, dude.
yeah, it's a lot of detail. I was just like, oh no.
So, and the other thing to think about, credit card data, oh my God. Also think about, especially if they're doing family history, now you might have information, that's not even the patient's and might be mental health related information, which is completely radioactive, right? So my mother was, suffered from depression and schizophrenia. Well, guess what? Now, I've identified someone who's not a patient of yours, and you could leak a patient's information on their mental health that's not even in your organization, right? So yeah, it's really sensitive information. So everything that we just talked about, differential privacy, training private models, training them in a secure place, all of this absolutely holds for you.
Yeah, I had also sent you a message that this would be level 2, but now that I know that there's credit card information and that kind of stuff, this is most certainly level 3 information.
Okay.
But that being said, you can create, synthetic data, right? I mean, and then you can then you can start thinking about what this might look like. So this could actually be a RAG, right? Just like we were talking about before, sort of that semi-structured RAG where it's like, maybe this is a call out to someplace that has, so do you already have demographic information by zip code or things like that? What other information do you want to pull in?
So I do have, let me look at that. I do have the zip code because they're all Arizona right now. Zip code, birth date, mostly the basic demographic. If they have children or not, their mortgage.
Yeah, this is definitely information that I could use to figure out who exactly you're talking about. So
Yeah, we have those things like like literally whatever the purchase in the past, what kind of purchase, yes or no to. Yes.
yeah.
Okay. So, so we can do the RAG and do the synthetic data. Let me go back and check with them. I can maybe delete some of the information and just use the general one without.
Yeah, there's
Have-
also various de-identification methods that you could use, but all of those would be dictated by what your data provider lays out as terms of policies of use and stuff like that.
Okay. All right. You know what? Let me go back and do some discussion with them first, then we'll come back. I was like, okay. No, I was like, oh no, I actually have more than to share.
Yes. So you have the process, you just have to figure out the safe way to do it.
Yes, and I would probably
Excellent.
ask you guys which method to use after I figure that one out. Thank you so much. I appreciate you guys.
Absolutely. Swapnita or Anant, do you have questions?
I do.
Yes.
So should I ask my questions now? I just wanted to
Please.
discuss my project. Okay, perfect. So I have two projects. One is personal and one is Vanderbilt. And I did consultation with Umang on my personal project and he was amazing. Like, thank you, Umang. So for my Vanderbilt project, I'll start with brief background so that you understand completely what I'm trying to do. So I'm the Assistant Director for Life Sciences Collaboration. So basically, I'm representing everything that BU and BUMC has that a pharma company might be interested in. And then pharma companies come to us saying, we are interested in, for example, Novartis is coming and asking, hey, do you have something in cardiovascular space, specifically on this target? Or sometimes their inquiries are super broad. Do you have people working on organoid models that we would like to partner with? And what I'm trying to do is whenever these inquiries come, just right now, everything is manual. I have to look through publication databases. I have to look through like NIH databases for what kind of abstract they have published. We set one-on-one meetings based on like general understanding, like Jesse, he works in AI, he has done this project, maybe he has something in this space. So I'm trying to automate everything and I'm having hard time deciding what should be my workflow is. And one option is I can just build a database. So the database will have names of all of our PIs, what kind of abstract have they published in, or just like processed version of those abstract where only keywords go in those databases.
More text. More text is better.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then is developing database is the way to go, or let me show you a quick file.
Sure.
So this is what I have from NIH. So from 2015 to 2024, that is related to arterial fibrillation. And there are maybe 86 projects in there, and there is like a detail, like lots of this data is not important, but like typical length of abstracts. I know there is one abstract filled somewhere here. So is developing database is the way to go, or is there a better approach where I can, this is one document for one very limited space with 84 entries, including abstracts and everything.
Yeah.
I could just input this as a context and do this basically for every search term I have. So cardiovascular, cancer, just download database. And this process, I'm assuming, could be automated. Or other approach is just build a database like I mentioned, find a way to keep that database updated.
but the real thing that you're going after is a representative from farm comes and has a particular interest in a particular kind of a project, and you want to be able to connect them with people who've done something like that. It's a great example of semantic search.
That's one way to do that. Other long-term application of this could also be maybe Umang is working on something and he has no idea because he's more focused on publishing that this could be of interest to Novartis. So kind of
so
pulling
going the other
pipeline
way. Okay, yeah.
Exactly.
And so you might
that's
also have
not
a text
immediate. So
description.
right.
Sure. So you might have a text description of like of interest, and you say, oh, there's a ping here. You realize that what you're doing is close to what they're interested in.
Exactly.
So sort of going both ways. Yeah, I would. I think keeping with full text is good. The nice thing about semantic search is about RAG is it almost doesn't matter how big it gets. And you could have this scales to dozens, hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands, millions of documents if you want. It just, the underlying technology just gets more, you know, it's harder to tune when it gets that large, but hey, you know, but if you're talking probably about hundreds of thousands, maybe on the outside, you think, or would it be more like tens of thousands of like abstracts and descriptions of work from Vanderbilt researchers?
I would say tens of thousands.
Yeah, that was my like back of the envelope. So I can imagine, yes, automating pulling, but pulling just the parts that you want to be able to match against the abstracts. So you want to have the person's name and information,
Right.
title, maybe it's the structured, right? But then also that abstract. Then and then that would be your RAG, that would be your retrieval part, right? So you have that all set up in a vector data store, and then you'd have, the task would look, like we've been talking about. So here's a description, here's a paragraph description from Novartis, for example, and they want to do a certain thing. Okay, now you do a search against these, and here are the top ones which are similar or related to that work, and so it could almost just be a retrieval, but for RAG, it would be retrieval augmented generation. So maybe what's generated is give me a summary of those that are similar and tell me how they are similar. So you could do that. And then you could go the other way, right? I mean, you could have, descriptions, long-standing descriptions of interests from different companies or, wherever, and then go the other way as someone comes in with a new, so now they have a new description of what they're doing, or they're just putting in a grant, or they've just written a paper. Okay, now are there funded studies, which are similar to this, or funded research opportunities which are close to this, and run it and say, oh, here's one which is close. Here's how it's the same. Here's how it's different.
Okay,
I would,
understood.
yeah, I would also look into, I think, yeah, I agree. RAG is definitely the way to kind of go. To make your search a little bit more efficient, there is hybrid search that you can add to vector stores. I know Deep Lake, you can do that, where since there's so many documents and you're going to want the search to be appropriate and fast, you can kind of have like sub vector stores where it'll first do like a hybrid search of like a topic like cardiovascular, and then only look at the cardiovascular data sets rather than looking through everything.
You could do that. You could also remember there's the what is the Facebook thing? The face. That's for like millions of documents, but you could do this in a way where you don't have to do keyword. If you know that there are keywords which like clearly separate, then that's okay, so long as they're really good, right? But if it is permeable at all, where they're really interested in like wound healing, well, wound healing could be, maybe that could be under cardiovascular. Wound healing could also maybe be under I don't know, a whole separate thing having to do with pressure sores, which has nothing to do with cardiovascular, So if the search is going to be permeable, then you probably won't want to do like a hard, but you might want to just find a way of accelerating and making that broad search more efficient. We tend not to use those here a whole lot, but they exist and they've been commercialized and they're really good.
Okay. And then other question is, for everything that I need to develop for my RAG, is there a way to automate it using AI? Because it's a lot of work, literally every DC space, every technology, then the NIH database, NSF database, publications. I know the sources like PubMed and NIH, I think that will.
Yeah. So Umang, I'm thinking, I think this would be a great example to come in for AI Fridays, to actually come in and sit down and code, because these could be if you're lucky, then there are APIs that they make available that Vanderbilt has paid for, and then you just call the APIs, and then what you do is you just refresh it, but really it ought to be like a button push. I want to refresh all my data, so I'm going to get all the things which are new since the last time. That would be ideal, because you ought not to be downloading, you ought not to be doing any of that. The effort of going and hitting their APIs would absolutely be worth it. So do you think that there are APIs that are available? Is that?
I feel like I have read that on NIH Reporter at least. Right. So I'm not sure about PubMed, but I can check that.
Perfect. And there are ways, but they're uglier if there aren't APIs, but that can be done too.
Okay. And is there a specific way to schedule Fridays, AI Fridays?
We'll be kicking those off after the end of this. So at the beginning of June, we'll start having those 10 to 12. Is that what we decided, Umang and Abby? I suppose I can actually look on the calendar. It looks like it is, 10 to 12,
Okay.
Starting on the 7th. This is going to be the first day of this.
Okay. And I kind of experimented with GPT-4 and Amplify, where I have a document that came from Novartis. I just uploaded that document and asked question, and it went horribly wrong. Like, it would show me people who have left Vanderbilt. It would sometimes take abstracts from a visiting speaker for Vanderbilt, and it kept missing like our major player that anyone who is maybe have been at Vanderbilt for 3 months would know, like, this is a person who does something. And research is something that happens over a decade. So I understand like the cutoff date and everything. Do you know why it works so horribly? Like it would give me 3 names where I'm pretty sure we have at least 300 faculty who have been publishing stuff for 10 years.
Oh yeah. So the problem with sort of untuned chunking is that it's going to chunk everything up small, and you're not able to say, oh, I want all, right? I want all that are close. And it also sounds like you have some additional like metadata that you're going to have to represent some ways. You're going to have a modified RAG. So if someone has left Vanderbilt, you don't want to include them, right? And so you actually, in that RAG step, you want to say, oh, you want to pull it out. Plus, you want to have like intelligent chunking. Like you don't want to have, here's my abstract. Oh, and I chunk in the middle. There's nothing keeping that from happening when you're just like saying, because what's happening is you're giving it up there and you're saying, good luck, right? Exactly. And it's going to chop it down to like every, I don't know, like 1,000 tokens. Umang, Abby, do you know what I don't know what it is, but it's like there'll be some overlap, but you have some structure that you can use. So like chunk at the abstract level, and always make sure that when you do that, you include the name, the title, the stuff you'd want to have in there that you want the model to know to be able to reason against. It sounds like you'll also need to have a decent sized context length so you can pull it all in. And if there's hard logic, if they've left Vanderbilt, you don't want them included, you're going to need to put that in programming in the retrieval step. And so it says, oh, they left Vanderbilt, do not include. because the model may or may not be able to do that, but you're asking it to do a lot.
How would it know if someone has left Vanderbilt? Like what kind of data do I need? I'm not sure because I don't think we maintain very good lists. We have failed at it many times before, like the department, faculty list and everything. I don't think they're updated. I don't think web pages are taken down on time.
I think, well, separate question. You might be able to work out something with HR.
Okay.
To see, because one thing you can do is if their email doesn't work anymore, right? If their email doesn't work, then now they might have been gone for a long time before their email stops working. But there may very well be something that you can use. But think of it as a separate tool, and this might be something that you would run offline. That this is going to be to like manage your data store. So yet another program that you might write with help of GPT-4 or of AI to curate your data set. And keep in mind, that what you'll want to do is you're going to be the, in the middle here, right? So it's going to generate this for you, and then you're going to want it to say, please give me the abstracts, names, information, include the following information, their name, their whatever information you want, and then you'll have all that, and then you could further curate and say, I don't want to do that. I don't want this person. And you could do specialized instructions, be sure to emphasize the following,
Okay.
all the instructions that think about what you might give to an assistant as they're preparing this list for you, right? You're not going to trust the assistant, who's a very bright undergrad, but an undergrad, to do everything, but you're going to say, okay, and whenever you have anything by these people, be sure to include them, and be sure that that can be part of the prompt.
Okay. Yeah. So it won't be as automated as I had it in my mind. I still have to do a lot of work.
Well,
to make
a
it
lot of it
work.
will be automated, but you ought to have the final eyes on, right? But it can actually be the product that you get may be like really good. And you may even then say, okay, now take the output of that, create a summary email as a starter. So a lot of it can be automated, but you have to be sure that you have, first it has to be manual so you can make sure that it's working just like you just did. You saw it didn't work just by uploading. Okay, now sort of the next step. Ideally, if you could come up with a test to run, so come up with a request or a description where the responses that you would like to have, and then come up with a score. Say, like a rubric, like you're grading someone's work, right? All right. If you include the following, if you include all the following, you get 10 points. If you quite literally do that, because what you'll do is you'll have another LLM grade your solution. And then you can say, oh, well, all right, this is working okay. Let me go ahead and try changing the retrieval step. I'm going to do the following with the retrieval step. Oh, my score went up. Or let me go and change the prompt here. So I'm just going to change the prompt. Oh, my score went down. Okay, don't do that. This gives you a way to actually steer what you're doing versus that wasn't good. Because right now what you have is good, bad, maybe better. But it's really hard to iterate on good solution with that. So come up with a metric that you can actually run. And then you have a larger LLM grade it. So if you have a couple of those, then you have a really good sense of how well it's working, whether it's improving, all that.
Perfect. Thank you. This was so helpful. I appreciate that.
Absolutely. Anantha, do you have something?
Yes, Professor. I was just wondering specifically if RAG is necessarily the best choice for my goal of retrieving relevant patents for expediting the examination process. And my main reason for sticking around was just because I haven't had the opportunity to talk to enough IP lawyers. I'm sure I'll have the opportunity in the foreseeable future. I've only had this idea in the last month, and I guess my dilemma is like legal vernacular is usually extremely specific, and if you're using RAG, then you're asking the model to use its own reasoning to generate a summary of what it considers relevant, which may take away from the accuracy of, or correctness rather, of what it's
So remember that with RAG, there are going to be a couple of steps, right? So one of them is actually pulling out relevant documents, and you can do the chunking at the like submission level, like you could do the entire
application as a single vector in the vector store. And that's what I've done so far. But my question is if doing that is going to take away any of the relevant information from the patent application. Because if I'm just feeding all the patents into the vector store and then asking for relevant vectors to be returned, there is no real generation part to that.
Not right. What you're getting is a representation. Know that you can use generative AI models to generate those vector embeddings, though. So that often is the real trick here, is to come up with a very good model to create those embeddings. And it could be that itself is a process of come up with a description, leaving out all the irrelevant details, which concentrates only on the specific, so you can actually imagine a generative AI model which pulls in a full application and then generates like a specific summary, which is then used to come up with that embedding. But the point is, off the rack embedding models might not do a good job because maybe they don't know a whole lot about legal vernacular, or they don't know a lot about patents either. So you want to have something which is very knowledgeable about that.
So my current plan of action was to feed in a knowledge base as well, which would contain all the sort of relevant training given to a paralegal or a patent examiner. So that's
think about that to train. So think about, and we'll have to hop off in just a moment. I'm so sorry, Anna.
No worries.
So think about using that to train the generative AI model, which is then going to be giving you the embeddings. Because if you do that training, so you have a very good legally training embedding model, then the representations that it's going to form out of those applications are going to be much, much better. They're going to be much richer and do a better job of summarizing them.
I see. So I think what I should focus on is the pre-masking versus the post-masking to get the embeddings versus making a more digestible output for a user.
Generally, yes. I don't know what you mean by post-masking versus pre-masking, but we can touch on that maybe during next.
On Friday. That's cool.
Okay.
I'm sorry. I know you have to run. I should have probably interjected earlier on, but
it's always a tricky social thing to navigate. So
yeah, I'm also applying for jobs as well simultaneously. So anyways, I'll see you on Friday, or if I don't see you tomorrow during the AWS thing. Thank you. Have a nice one.
Thanks, you too. See y'all later.